The requirement goes like this. Let's say if I open any existing record here, let's go with this one. Let's go with this field called industry. I want to make all my bunch of records that I'll be extracting. I wanted to update this information as banking. So that is what I wanted to do. I want to update this records industry is equal to banking. How can we do that? First thing, in case if there is a requirement that is coming your way saying that there needs to be data correction or there needs to be data cleanup, they would give us the input saying that what are the things that we need to do. They might say that I want to update all the accounts which is having they might give you a condition saying that if there is a phone number that is being placed, I want to update their industry. I'm just giving you a kind of simple example. If there is a phone number, I want to make sure that the industry is also updated. To which value that they need to update, it is also something that comes from your client. For example, I'm just updating this value to industry if there is a phone number. How would we proceed with this one? Instead of directly extracting that information and going with it, what I would do is I'll go with the first to check, I'll go ahead and check what would be the count of records that we have in the system. And that is where I would basically update my client saying that these are all the information that I have. And post that, I'll tell them that these are all the things that I'll be doing. Right? I'll share that queries in case if I have them handy before proceeding with it. If you ask me why we need to do it, at times an understanding, like just by reading a statement, we might have a different understanding. You might have a different understanding. Client might have a different understanding. To be on the same page, I would do that. Just a side tip in case if you are proceeding with this activity. Right? I'll open this developer console. Console is something that we have an ability to write down the query and see the results there. You can use your workbench also. I'm giving you another option to do it. This is how my developer console would look like. So here also you can write down your query, same thing that I'll do. But this time what I want is I wanted to check how many records are there in the system for which my phone number is populated. I'm just taking this random scenario wherein which I do not want to update all the records, but only few records where phone number not equal to null is something that I wanted to look at. I'll click on execute. So once that is done, it would show me how many list of records that I have in the system which have phone number not equal to null. So this is something that I would send it to them. So this is the query that I'm using, and I'll mention the number of records that are there in that particular org. Right? If I'm doing it in the sandbox, I'll mention that for this sandbox with name ABCD, I have these many records. Right? I'll mention that count and I'll also share that query. So once I know that how many records that are there in the system, now I would plan those activities. Right? So first I got to know the count of the records. So I'll write it down here. I'll write, in case if you're sending an email, you would write it down the sandbox or whatever the name of the environment that you're working, you will write down that and you will mention that sandbox name. Once that is done, you would mention the record count. For now, it is 112, and you will also share that query. Now, in addition to that, what is something that I would do? In case if I'm updating industry field, industry field is something that I wanted to update as per my requirement. Now, what I would do is I will take a backup of this one. I would take a backup of this one. How can I take the backup? The same way that we have done just now. All right. So I'll go back to my workbench, click on my queries, select SQL query, do the process once again, just because I wanted to keep a copy of the existing information. If you ask me why, at times clients, after giving us an input, they would come back saying that, no, we do not want that particular approach that we have discussed. We want that data to be back. But at times that might be a scenario. It's always good that you have a backup with you so that you do not get into that trouble of they asking you some information, we will not be able to provide it. So that is where I'll take a backup of it. What is a backup? Backup is nothing but I'm taking the current extract of that records, right? So whatever the current information that I have, I'm taking that extract. I'll click on this query, right? I just wanted to save this information. It would be extracted in CSV. I'll keep that file handy if there is some requirement of putting back the changes. So if you see the number of records that are being saved is 112, right? So I've downloaded that file. I have a backup with me. So I'm happy with the number of records and the query, and I'll also attach that extract that I have in an email and send it to my clients. If they give me a confirmation, that is where I'll proceed with the requirement that we have, where in which we wanted to update the industry as banking. All right. So that is something that we wanted to proceed. So I have the query, I have the file attached also, which has been sent to my client. And I also have a backup of it. Now my extract is done. Now I'll prepare that file. How to prepare that file? I'll quickly switch back to the Excel sheet. Give me 1 second. Now what I have IDs, I have the names of the account, and I have the industry column. So in case if you want to process that information, I'm just opening the same file, which is the backup file. In case if you have to do it, you have to take a copy of it. And backup is something that you want to retain for some certain point of time until unless this activity is being closed in production. So that is why you take a copy of it and you proceed with that file, the second file that you have copied. Since it is something that I'm doing it in my org and I do not worry about the data that I have here, so I'll go ahead with this same file that I have. So what is my requirement? All the fields that I have phone number, I have to update the industry field as bank. So what you need to do, you have to go back and get that right value for your banking, the pick list value. This account type is a pick list value. I'll go to the Salesforce or get that right value, right? So if it is a text, you can fill it out, and depending on the values that have been shared with you by your client, you would go ahead with that. If there is something that is a pick list value, I'll go to that pick list value, copy that value and come back here and update it, right? Just to be sure, because at times pick list values, when you're dealing with the pick list values, if you do not provide the right value, if that pick list value is marked as restrict the values within the value set that we have, it would throw an error called bad pick list value. When it says bad pick list values, that means we are not providing a value that is not listed down here. We are providing something that is not listed down in this values that we have. Now to avoid that, I usually prefer copy paste, right? So I've copied that information into my Excel sheet. I'm just pasting it, right? I would paste that information here. So once I have the information, depending on the logic that I have, I can go ahead and update this information. I'll update the information according to the requirement that I have. As of now, I'm just updating it to banking. One problem with an Excel sheet is, let's say if you have gaps in between, this double click option would not copy the entire information in all the columns, right? So if you see, there are a couple of instances where my option of this this fill option was stopping in between. The reason being, there is also a value that is already there. So Excel sheet would think that, okay, till this point is what I need to fill. I am expecting the user to basically decide whether I have to copy to the next lines, or I have to wait there. So it would take the second option where it would wait for our inputs. In case if you are preparing that file, that is something that you need to take care of, right? So once you check that information, so you can select any column, and that is where it will show you the number of records that you are processing in addition to your header. So this is your fields that we have from our Salesforce. These fields are important because this is what would be taken as a consideration by the workbench or whatever the tool that you use to map those fields that we have in Salesforce. Right? So you would check that number to see if that is matching. If everything is fine, you would save that. Right? You would save that file into a CSV file. Right? Make sure that even though you are doing it in an Excel sheet, make sure that you are saving it as .csv file. Right? How to save it in a .csv file? I hope the small screen is visible. Right? You would pick up a location, and I'll say, yeah. So you would select .csv here. There would be a couple of options. Let's say CSV, UFT, UTF-8. That are something that we do not use until unless you have some other characters, let's say Japanese characters or something of that sort. Anything that is not in English, that is where you would select that option. As of now, you would select CSV as an option and click on save. Now I have a file that I can use. All right. Now I'll go back to the Salesforce. I'll go back to the workbench that we are using to do this data load. What I have a file that has been ready for use. Right? I've made the changes on that file so that I can feed it back to the workbench. Now workbench, what it would do, it would basically process that file and do the changes on this records. Right? As of now, if you see, still if I click on execute, I have certain fields which are still showing agriculture and certain fields are blank. Right? Once I complete the process, if I click on execute, these all columns would be updated as banking. That is my end goal of this data migration. Right? So that is something that I do it. Right? So I have some file or I have a query which gives me a results on my developer console, so that I can double check how many things are already done. Right? Even though my workbench says all the records are done, I would have this query so that I can see how many records are properly updated. Right? It would be difficult for me to open individual records and see whether it is updated or not. I would have a query before hand itself so that I can check that information. Now, how to do this data migration? So we have existing records in the system. We have some existing records in the system for which we wanted to do that one. So in that case, you would use an operation called update. Right? Update is something that you are clicking on edit of a record and saving it. Update is something like this. If I want to update this information, I'll populate that value and I'll click on save. Since we cannot do 112 records by opening that record, clicking on edit and then editing this information and saving it, so that is something that takes time. That is why we go with the data migration as a process to help this get it done in less time. Update is something that it is like edit, you click on edit, make some changes and save it. Update is like that. Insert is something that you would create a new record. Delete is something that you want to delete a record from the system. In case if they say that these are the duplicate values in which you want to delete them, you'd use a delete option. What is needed? What is the mandatory column that you need in a deletion? ID column. I hope you know that ID is something that comes up at the top and it is a unique identifier for your each and every record. So that is something that you need for deletion. So I would have something like this to check if everything is fine. Like I've told you, update is something that you need an ID and a column that you want to make the changes. So if I click on data tab here, I would have an update option here. Click on it. If I want to use the option called update. Now you might be wondering, how is this Excel sheet being utilized? I'll get to that point. For time being, anything that you want to do, you have to do it in your Excel sheet. Once that is ready, you would come back to your workbench, select the right option. In case if you want to create a new records, you would use insert. In case if you want to update some information on an existing records, you would use an update. In case if you want to delete something, you can use a delete option. As of now, I'm using update option. Now, Salesforce would ask me, the workbench would ask me on which object you want to do that process. Because I have records which needs to be corrected on account object, I'll be selecting account object here. Now, it's not a single record that I want to update. If it is a single record, so you would go ahead and update that information. Since we have a bunch of records that we need to update, I'll select from file here, from file, and I'll click on choose file. So this is the time where you would use your file that you have generated, right? That you have prepared previously. So I'll go ahead and select that. Whenever it is possible, I'll break that data load into chunks, right? So that I can keep a track of items that I have performed. So here you would upload that file, click on next. Now this is the place where on my left-hand side, I have the fields from Salesforce. These are Salesforce fields. And this CSV field that we have is referring to the columns that we have in CSV. If you remember, we were using ID column, we were using the name, account name, and industry field. These are the CSV column is something that we have from an Excel sheet. If you remember, ID, name, and industry are the three fields that have extracted from Salesforce. Now what it is asking is, this phase is called mapping phase, where in which you need to map your fields or you need to map your columns from your Excel sheet to your fields in Salesforce, because it is a way of basically telling the Salesforce that, hey Salesforce, this is what we wanted to do. So that is why for ID, for an update, ID is a mandatory column. Second thing is, you need to tell what all fields that you wanted to update. I do not want to update this name column, right? Name is something that I do not want to update. I wanted to update industry field. If you see, everything was auto-matched. I didn't have to do anything. Why is it happening? Because the field columns that I have, same, yeah. So that is why I would prefer copy pasting the field names onto my Excel sheet columns so that I do not have to spend time here to map those fields accordingly. My time
If
to
it is
basically map
different,
them.
it's going
You
to
can still
ask
use a
like
different,
map.
right? You have to map it manually. That is something that
Okay.
we need to take care of
Yeah.
if you are going with a different field. And also double check if it is mapped to the right field. At times, what would happen is a space here and there would not auto match that field. Right? If you have space
Okay.
something at the front or the back, it might not match. It is on us to basically check that. And also check the number of rows that have been processed. It says that the file that I have used is uploaded properly, and it says it is processing 112 records. So which is something that I already have with me. Right? 112 records is what I'm also looking at. So once you are done with that, scroll down, check if there anything is there. So once done, click on map fields. When you click on map fields, this place is asking me, this place is basically showing me that what all mapping that I've done. In case if there is anything that is there, you can go back and update it accordingly.
You correct.
Right. So this is something
Yeah.
that you can take a screenshot or you can basically keep it handy just in case
Okay.
to refer to this one for future purpose to see whether you have done it correctly or not. It is something that you can take a screenshot of. Let's say if there is some unknowingly, if there are two fields, right, you can basically check, okay, I've mapped only two fields. If there are a lot many of fields, in case whether you want to double check if you have mapped that field or not, that is where the screenshot comes in handy. Right, so this is something that I will take a screenshot of. Once done, you can click on this and basically click on confirm update if you do not want to go with that route. I'll click on confirm update. So that is where this workbench would start processing it. Right? If it's a simple job, that is where I can see the results on the spot where it says 112 records are updated and 0 errors. So this is where you can see the records being updated. So this status column, call it status column, basically gives me what is the operation that has been up. If it is a creation of a record, it says created. If it is an update, it says updated. If it is a deletion, it says deleted. Right? So this is a column that you can double check to see what is the operation that you perform. I'm not sure if I have told you this one. So this is something that you can double check before proceeding with your operations. Check if you are connected to the right org or not. Is this the place where you want to do an update or not? On hover of this link, it tells you to which org that you're doing this data load. So instance is basically talking about my URL. So this is the same URL where I want to do that update. Right? Double check that before you proceed on that confirmation. Right? I'm just giving you a tip so that you do not load it into a different org. At times, what would happen is you wanted to load it into org1, but you end up loading into org2. So that is something that you can double check. Right? So my records were successful. What I can do, I can check those records from here itself. I can click on that link and say view on Salesforce. Right? View on Salesforce. That is where it would take me to that particular record in Salesforce to see that change. Another ways that I've already told you, I'll have a query so that I can click on execute to see
Yeah.
it has been updated or not. If it is already in place, we can click on refresh grid to see the updated changes. So if you see, all the records were updated as industry equal to banking. Right? So that is how I would prepare that process. I've told you, I've walked you through the steps on how we do that data migration, which includes your data cleanup also. If there is something that you need to delete, all you just need to do is instead of update, you would select delete here. Same process, you would provide that file and you would proceed with that records. Right? In the deletion, only ID is needed. Once you process that, if all the records were deleted, if I click on refresh grid, all this 112 records would be removed from the system. So just like how you do it for an update, you do it for the insertion also the same process, deletion is also same process, update anyhow the same process. Once this process is done, the other steps that I would do is, till this point the data migration is completed in terms of technical terms. In case if you need to give an update to your clients, what I would do, I would get the same extract again. I would run this query again to make sure that I have an extract confirming to my client saying that these are all the records that have been processed and these are the results. What are the results that I can show? This industry column being banking for all the records that I have is an indication that the process went fine. But at times, what would happen is if there are any validation rules, if there are some kind of a code errors, let's say a trigger is failing or something other is failing, you would get that results here. And if you remember, there were 112 successful records. At times, there might be errors also. If you remember that screen, it showed me 112 records were successful, right? And 0 errors. At times, if there are any errors, what I would do is I will again send an email saying that I've processed 112 records. I would prepare a table saying that I have processed 112 records, out of which success were 100 records and errors were 12 records. And I would basically list down all the errors that I've got for this 12 records. All the errors might be one or they might be different. So that is something that clients or the other development team, in case if you are part of that, you would take care of that. In case if there is some other development team who will be looking at it, they would take care of it to see how to rectify that issue. Or in case if it is something related to the data, that is where you would look into it. Like I've told you, if there is a bad pick list value, instead of banking, you are sending it as baking, right? That is where you would correct that information and update it, right? You would not directly send your errors. You would double check if there is some issue with your data, you would correct that. If not, if there is some code errors or some kind of a validation rules that are coming in, that is where you would seek the help out of a developer, or in case if you are able to figure it out, what is the validation rule that is failing, what is the information that is missing, you would go ahead and correct it and do a data load once again for the failed records. This time you will not update all the records, but you would correct the error file and upload only that subset of records. That means that 12 records is what you would process. So that is where you would process those 12 records. Now, if you have 4 records which are related to the code, rest all passed, that is where you would share with your development team to have a look at it. Or you might look at it and say, this is what we need to do to fix this one. And you would proceed with that. So before doing the process, you would take an extract. After doing that process, also you would take an extract to see you have the previous version and the latest version. Because once the changes are done, you do not have a rollback option in Salesforce for this data. So that is something that you need to take a look at. So that is all about the data migration that we do.
Hey guys, if you like this video, do like, share and subscribe to SFDC Quest.